Okay, with the war drums off in the Ukraine, we wish peace to the world and incredible audacity to repeat movements of other despotic leaders in the world to just be aggressors and not just settle for whatever borders are currently running. I mean, Hitler, Yamach Shemai did the exact same thing. Unbelievable how history can just try to repeat itself again and again. Okay, so at least the focus is not on Jews, it's on Russia. When it comes to Esther and preparing for Purim, you gotta understand that when she goes into the king had many wives, and he didn't see Esther whenever she wanted. It's whenever he wanted to have her company. If she wanted to see the king, she would have to make a special party and invite him. Otherwise, she has to wait her turn. If she goes in uninvited, she risks her very life. The sign that she gets to live is that the king extends the golden scepter towards her. Esther, the first time in going into the king uninvited, touches the tip of the scepter, indicating her acknowledgement and her gratitude for her life. The second time she goes in and pleads with the king to rescind Haman's wicked decree. Haman was just trying to destroy the entire Jewish people. It says that he gave her, it says that Vayoshet HaMalach LaEsther es Sharbit HaZahav. He extends to Esther, the king, extends to Esther the golden scepter, V'takam Esther v'tamai lifnei HaMalach, and Esther gets up and stands before the king. The Alter Rebbe says in these words, V'gam shamnem v'tagah b'reish hasarbit. Before, in the earlier visit that Esther made to the king uninvited, it says that she touched the tip of the scepter. V'kan mashma shenasam lakol hasarbit. Here it appears that he gives her the entire scepter with all the graphic connotations. V'gam lahavin inyan zeh b'chol zman mahu. And to understand, what does this have to do with us? Hine knesset Yisrael nikra m'shem Esther al shem v'nich haster ponai v'yom mahu. We know when it's talking about Esther, it's talking about the Jewish people that are called Esther. As it says, I will hastir, I will conceal my face on that day. That shows that the Jewish people are subject to this veil of Esther means veil, concealment. The masks of Purim are embedded in Esther's name. Kipnei Hashem shehu gilei shchinasei. What we learned yesterday, when it talks about the face of God, it's talking about the revelation of His divine presence. Before we called it Ratzin, God's will. As it says in the blessing that the Kohanim give, the priests, it says, Hashem shall shine His face upon you. Hu aksha b'zman hagalus, le'siteres b'bkinas b'yemahu. Now we're in that day. That day is a time where God is seeing us as Esther, this woman who has to completely conceal her identity. The Jewish people had to be under the rule of somebody else. We were under a state of concealment and not allowed to be ourselves. That is portrayed welcome. It's portrayed by the idea of God's face shining upon us or not. When Hashem's face is not shining upon us directly, but we're veiled and masked like on Purim, that's called Esther. Hastir panai v'yomahu. On that day, in the day of exile, God will be concealed. Ki yem hahu meire al yem she'ena nira v'nigla. When it says on that day, it means one that is not specified, implying that it's not seen or revealed. When we say on this day, it means something that's perceived, something that's experienced, something that's not veiled, something that's revealed. The Derek Pratt, before we were speaking about Your signs we did not see. It's because we didn't have the ability of sight, and we spoke about that yesterday. So what is this whole imagery of this scepter and this submission of Esther falling on her face before the king and then being given, standing up because he basically extended his entire scepter to her? We're going to see it is something to do with life. She took that as a sign in the literal sense that she gets to live, even though she broke the rules. She went into the king with a certain audacity, uninvited. So the Jewish people are called Esther. We go through this type of concealment when you can't face the king. You have to have subterfuge and risk your life to do it. This is the state of things in the time of exile. And in general, this occurs in every soul of a Jew. That whenever we allow ourselves to be consumed by our physical concerns, that represents a diminishment of our shine. So that's the veil. That's Esther. Whenever we're involved in things that take us away from directly experiencing God, that's considered Esther. That's a state of exile. Welcome. That's a state of not having God's light shining upon the person. When one is totally absorbed and preoccupied in his mind and his heart with the love of Hashem, to cleave to Him, in a revealed emotional way. It's meant to be just the way you experience, welcome Rachel, just like you experience a emotional, which means your heart's beating faster, or whatever emotional response you have, that is something that affects you in a visceral, real way. Welcome. It's something, when your emotions are engaged, that engages your whole body. So a person is intended to be engaged in a way, at least once a day, or 3 times a day, in a way that he experiences it. You're meant to feel that, and that's supposed to charge you through the day. So this is called one's mind and heart absorbed in the experience of loving God, to cleave to Him in a revealed way in the heart. So then in the times of exile, when it's called Esther, this concealment and this veil, then that force is said to transcend us. It's not something that's as easily accessible. That's Esther. That in the time of exile, that's when it's said to be this concealment. Because God is not necessarily revealed in our hearts like it's intended to be. This is described as the idea of a point or a source in a chamber. That is analogous to the core of the heart. And it's like a point that you have to seek out. So too it exists, but it's maybe concealed within every single Jew, but every single Jew has this point within. No one is lacking that inner experience, that the love of God is something that exists within every single person. But how do you reveal it? This is not equal in every person. Everybody has their own journey towards revealing that, taking off that veil. Esther is a process of approaching the king through any means possible to correct things. But in the times of Mashiach, which is currently something we're supposed to experience, when the person is refined and cleansed, then the glory of Hashem will be revealed, and all flesh will see. It's intended to be something that's visceral. That's why it says kol basar. All flesh will see. See just means the most direct, the most convincing of all the senses is sight. Our bodies themselves will not just feel, will see. Wisdom is usually associated with vision. Amar b'yemahu, and it says on that day, Hine Elokeinu zeh kivinu lai. Then it says, behold, our God, this we have hoped for. This is the idea of now. It's something that was previously b'yemahu. It was a time of exile, but it becomes, this is our God, something that we could experience in a tangible way. Ki sheyar er Hashem b'skalos. No, perish, meaning that Hashem will reveal godly light to the extent there will be such a calling in a spiritual dimension that you have the ability to connect with it and have it so permeate your mind, your mortal mind, v'ro kol basar, and you will see all flesh, b'ri'eh gashmias, with physical sight, chushias, tangible, ki Elokeinu hu b'chinas zeh, that our God is something that you could point to and say this, or not necessarily point to, but in other instances it does say that, but it's at least experienced as something that is called this, zeh. Asher lazeh kivinu loi. That's what we were hoping for. That's what we longed for. V'loi b'vchinas hahu, and that's the emerging from the idea of who, that day, this undefined, indescript name when everything's concealed and veiled and wearing a mask. May the masks come off on Purim, in a sense. Okay, then we celebrate masks for the first time. It says in the future to come, there will be no more holidays that will make a impression except one holiday, Purim. There's something special about Purim that it's always something about complete, pushing it as far as you could possibly go. So it goes on to explain this. I'm just wondering if I could put that in a separate share and complete this thought by skipping to the end. I'm going to skip the whole section in the middle, and I'm going to want to do that in a separate class. It goes back to myrrh, blinator. I mean, myrrh is myrrh, one of the 11 ingredients in the incense. It's about understanding the bitterness of the experience of exile and how that is intended to be transformed and then celebrated. Celebrating God and rejoicing in our Maker. Okay, so that might be a separate share. I'm going to skip. I think we can maybe finish this if we go pretty quick. V'hinei kol minei aliyas v'iskarvus k'nes Yisrael HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'Shabbos v'Yom Tov kol ma shemesalis b'ilu achi ilui. So we spoke about how Purim is going to be the only festival that you're going to really notice. The rest are going to just be like the regular celebrations of the time of redemption. But all of the holidays are currently seen as an ascending a ladder. You go up higher and higher. That's called touching the head of the scepter. When you touch the head of a scepter, you identify that there is a beginning of it and an end. You're touching one end. You recognize you enter into the world of polarity and therefore a spectrum from one extreme to the other. She's touching one to recognizing she's on one side. She's in this submissive position before the king who's all powerful and can save her people's existence. So when she touches the Reish Sarbit, the tip of the scepter, that's indicating an incremental process, of an approach. That approach is indicated in terms of our time throughout the year and celebrated, for example, on the Sabbath and holidays like Pesach. that is another time when you're taken higher. But that's all part of this sort of incremental, step-by-step approach. So all festivals are, even though that they are an elevation, it's still one that is incremental. It's a steady slope. It's part of a context, a framework that you've already existed in. Purim's different. So we call this touching the head of the scepter. Because when we're talking about the scepter, it seems to be like the Yesod, like it resembles, but it's the drawing of infinite godly light, which is the life of the entire world. It depends on this conduit. So you have a scepter that represents God's ability to take infinity and bring it into the finite. The point that we spoke about before is the place where it enters in the world. He takes the sparks of our souls. We might not be aware of it, and that is supposed to be what is used to determine all godly energy in the world. It's a big responsibility. But here that's represented in the golden scepter. All the life of the supernal realms, the lower realms, and everything in between. That's why we see the verse says in Megillah Esther that when Xerxes extends the golden scepter, one would live. But you're not able to take the whole scepter and pretend you're king. It stays in the king's hand. You have some access to it. You have this conduit to experience infinity in a way that you could handle. Make one day a week a big celebration. The rest of the time we have to work. So this is this incremental process. Purim is different. That's a taste of the world to come. And from the tip of the scepter, you have the spark that comes into the rest of the world, and that's your access to the divine energy. And don't think it's a small thing. This is a flaming fire of love. So when the soul is experiencing its source of life, even though it's called just the tip of the golden scepter, that is the experience of a tremendous passionate love of God. And a flame that goes upwards. Zahav elyin, zahav atnufa. It goes on to experience supernal gold, which is also described as love of God. The katseo hatachten hu keshe'ava aza zu ba'era mislavas bes baininus vidulasi v'gdulas ein seit baruchu v'malan kolam v'sevim kolamim. So the extreme expression of this, when this golden scepter is the tip of it, represents the ability to go into the lowest possible realm and even experience there a tremendous passionate love from contemplating God's infinity. So a person in this world, when he goes through this process, which is called meditation, hisbaininus is a type of contemplation of the infinity of Hashem, how he not only transcends every world, or I should say the opposite, not only gives life to every aspect of the world, but completely transcends it in his infinity. So that's one extreme. That's the lowest extreme in our world. Contemplating the idea of God's relationship with the worlds, how he is present in all the worlds and gives it life and transcends it. But there's something that's higher, a higher type of meditation that takes you to the next step. That's associated with Purim. That's the other end of the scepter, the hand part of the scepter, the part that if you reach, it's said to be as if the king extended the entire scepter to Esther. So the veil of Esther is now completely lifted and experiencing the source of infinity. That's Esther approaching the king. So this the higher part, the part that the scepter's holding, the king's holding on to of the scepter, Hu keshemislahaves mislahetes bisbainanusai. That's when you have this burning passion experience of one's meditation on the Mahusvats Musis Baruch, on God's complete transcendent of everything, to the extent that it's called his very essence, which means everything experiences or has an equal access to that. So every single point, no matter how finite you think you are, is really one with the core infinity that's beyond the whole scale, the golden scepter. There's no point in that, because it's the idea of God's essence is everywhere. You don't have to rise higher, you just have to realize that where you are is the ultimate infinity of the origin of the Creator. God has no origin. The leis machshava tfisebe klal, and there is no thought that could contain Hashem at all. So this is a type of hisbainus that transcends thought. The leis shayach be lashon gedula mal kolam seven kolamim, and then you cannot speak anymore about God's greatness being the one who fills the world and transcends them. Rak al ha'aram shachas achayas meni sporach. That's only talking about God's radiance that extends through this golden scepter. But then there's the King himself that's connected with the other end of the scepter. That's when we talk about Hashem's greatness. Hashem's greatness, when we talk about Hashem, who he is in his core, that is without any cheker, no determination at all. Perish, meaning that it's not at all the approach that one contemplates how great Hashem is, how transcendent he is, and praiseworthy. That only is about in reference to God's name, God's four-letter name, Yud Kei Vav Kei. That's talking about God's ability, or God's function of drawing energy into worlds. Aval kame mamash, but what is God? That's God's function. But God himself, chashiva ki'ilu ein shamayim klal. Then in that realm there are no worlds. It's not about climbing a ladder, getting to a higher world, a higher frequency, but it's experiencing of total oneness with the etzem of Hashem, as if there are no worlds, it says here. That says, I am the Lord, I do not change. And God is the same before the world was created and after. Nothing changed in Hashem. Hakol b'shava, everything equally. So you can't talk, when we talk about God in what he truly is in his core, there's no relevance to speak about all the worlds and all the spiritual realms. The fact that God animates the worlds and transcends them, because God is totally beyond any discussion of world or experience, or I don't know. Yes, it's more of an awareness. It's more of an identifying with this unchangeable divine origin, as opposed to experiencing. Because anything you could experience can only be finite. It's more of an identity. It's an awareness. So it's his blindness on the etzem, on the essence, which is not really a meditation at all, because no thought can grasp him. It's an awareness. But an awareness sounds like a thought. Let's see more. Gadol Hashem hula me'ed be'ir Elokeinu harkad shev amru zalim asay nikra gadol keshu be'ir Elokeinu. Perish lefanu yisbarach leishak lashon gedula makar chekol emitzaliyim taktenim. The only time we say God is great is in relationship with him being in the world. Here we call it Ir Elokeinu, the city of God. That's when Hashem is considered great. But when we talk about Hashem as he's independent of his city, or his the world that he creates, then you cannot talk about any greatness, because that's all relative. And God's completely beyond any characteristic. And it's his humility that allows himself to be called great, but in creating the worlds and to being a source of their life. to be king of the world. So Hashem is this king that gives life to the world. And that's considered as if Hashem is settling in this world, and therefore it's a humbling experience. He's lowering himself to be part of the world. Because in truth, God is Kadesh, removed and transcendent, if you're going to talk about him relative to the world. Avalasid, but in the future to come, and I think I'm going to end with the end of this paragraph, it just gives us gorgeous description of the way things will be in the coming redemption that's unfolding now. In the future to come, it's promised that God's light will be so revealed and so powerful, meaning to say, not just like whatever inspiration was required to make a golem or something like that, or to understand Kabbalah properly, but God's very essence and core, how he exists everywhere in every single detail equally. That's the connecting with Hashem at the level of not changing, God's unchanging Ani Hashem, this acknowledgement of his existence as Ani, saying I do not change. So when you connect to God in an essential way, not just one that's a spiritual ascent, but one that's a core recognition, that is what is descriptive of the future redemption, when you connect with Hashem as he's unchanging. So the world of change is the scepter of one extreme to the other, and the whole spectrum in between. The appreciation of the core is the always already there, the experience of the journey being the identity, that the journey is the destination. Identifying that is symptomatic of the future redemption experience. That's the experience of the past, present, and future existing at once. So that is, when you're really in the zone, I guess that's the closest thing to imagine what that means. So all flesh will see with the eye of the physical intellect. Okay, so we switched it a bit from an experience of sight to one that is the eyes of the physical intellect. It sounds like, if it's the eyes of the intellect, it seems like the power of imagination. That our God will be something that will be overt, experienced, and said this. And that experience, when you can connect to the very core, that will specifically take place on the material plane. So at the end of the whole binary code of the matrix, you come to this very pleasant town, city that you live in, and that specifically is where the core experience can take place. It has to be in the lowest realm to be complete, to express God's infinity everywhere. If it's in the spiritual realm, it looks like a sort of obvious thing. When you take the thing that's most a veil, the thing that takes us most away from this living that purpose in life, which is the physical world, when you conquer the physical realm, that is the ultimate expression of the perfection of the intent of creation. The physical realm is conquered, and that is therefore not the revelation of godliness, of godly experience, but an awareness of an identity that transcends any spectrum, any scepter. The Kamesha Amr Mazal al Pasuk Keis Yemer Liakiv Lisrael Mapal Kel. And as our sages teach on the verse that says, at this time, Yaakov, it will be said to Yaakov and Yisrael, the two names for the Jewish people, what is God up to? What's he doing? Because the angels, the ministering angels, the ones who serve God, I guess all of them do, this very high level of angels then will ask this to the righteous people, to all the Jewish souls. Umakam shahayu, well, living in bodies. Umakam shahayu malache sharas imrim ayem makam kvedei yamru malakol arts kvedei. And in place of the ministering angels saying, where is God's glorious place? They will say rather, all the earth is filled with his glory. So the lowest realm, the earth, that's where they're going to have to go to have these earthly beings, these human beings, the Jewish righteous people. The angels are going to ask, what's God up to at this moment? In other words, what are you experiencing? Because you're simply making the identifying, as the Rebbe says in this final sikha, it's since every Jew is ultimately, in the most ultimate way unified with God, this is something that's obvious. That's why we start with Maide and Mada'ani instead of I, recognizing the I as this one with the, we call in Hebrew Yesh Hamiti, the true existence, the Ani Hashem Leishanisi, the level of God that doesn't change. That's obvious. So we start with Mada'ani. What am I going to do with that? It's a Maida, it's a submission. Starts that way throughout the day, and bringing divine energy throughout the day. So here it's about, what is God up to? So what is the Jew experiencing? The angels are going to ask, what are you up to? What's on your mind? And that is their connection with the aspect of divinity that's called the etzem, the core. But instead of asking, where is Hashem, they'll say, the earth is filled with his glory. That's expressive of the verse, the woman of valor is the crown of her husband. Because the light of Hashem that is revealed upon her, upon the Jewish people, now is called her husband, Avalasi. But in the future to come, it will be a higher experience. Therefore, the verse says, you fell, don't get up again, virgin Jew, perish, because there's not going to be any relevance of saying anything about getting up anymore. Because down below, God will be fully revealed. There's no reason to get up anymore. No matter where you fall, God is there too, to be experienced and to bring to an authentic experience of whatever's there. If it's meant to be something that's not optimum for that person, he will find a different way to express the exact same thing that is in line with Taryag Mitzvah Satera. Because then there's not going to just be the service of pushing away evil, but to transform it. It's meant to serve a purpose. It's meant to be transformed. So in the final redemption, you don't have to get up anymore. The Rebbe said countless times that we've finished the tshuva. In fact, we already finished that in the times of the Holocaust, towards the end of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe's life. We've already repented. That there is nothing to wait for. It's simply some time to simply get over the trauma, and then the green light for a new approach. When the ultimate berurim have been done, someone pointed out that a mainstream rabbi says that now, that what the Rebbe's words were meant to be actually listened to and not ignored, or said it couldn't possibly mean anything important that we have to actually change. The Rebbe said the final rectification of the world has been completed. So now what do? We are told to look into Chassidus, see what it says about the redemption, and start living that. That means the Avodah has changed. The Avodah now is as hafcha. It's not intended to emphasize the importance of filters so much as what is the purpose of these things? What is an appropriate reaction? What is good for me today for me to do in relationship to those opportunities that will make me a better person tomorrow? That is the questions we have to ask ourselves. That's eshafcho. It's not about repressing, it's about expressing everything in the right way. It's not just about askafia sitracha bilvad levatlam lachniam, to nullify evil. It's not just to nullify the evil, as was the case in all times of exile. The ksiv lemakim mitzrayim b'vchayreim. V'yarig malachim adirim. They had to engage in battle and destroy evil. Raki gam az amim safa bruro. It's rather that on that time I am going to transform the people to have an eloquent voice. There is going to be a language that is going to be expressive of truth, that is going to be common to all the nations of the world. There will not be Hitler's standing up Yamach Shemam and saying we're trying to conquest and conquer. Whatever borders were in place in the times of the creation of the UN, which is not necessarily the best force right now, but that time marked the time where, at least the Rebbe's view was that whatever boundaries were there, just conquest is something that's of the past, and that's what we're going to use going forward. It's implied, not said overtly. So Purim is all about this type of transformation. That the people who hated the Jews end up, those who were left of them, totally thinking that Jews were the heroes of the world. And that's represented by that the ruling force, Xerxes at the time, became good to the Jewish people. He liked them now. The very mouth who said, do whatever you want with these people, I don't care. He tells Haman the wicked. He says now he feels good about this people. He says, write whatever you want, any good things in your eyes, Esther, for the benefit of your people. This is his transformation. That God's glory is revealed below, specifically in the darkness. Have a great, luminous day.